Welcome to this presentation and demonstration titled A Renaissance of Natural Colour. Now, this presentation will focus mainly on the two main blue pigments, azurite and lapis lazuli, which have been or were in use for centuries. And the height and most spectacular use of the pigments was during the Renaissance, and then slowly these pigments were replaced with some synthetic pigments, blue dyes and so on in the late 18th century. And then the 19th century saw the replacement of many of these pigments as a rudimentary chemical industry started to develop rapidly and then produce in 1801 cobalt blue, 1827 natural synthetic ultramarine known as French ultramarine, and in 1845 this was invented, the collapsible metal tube, and this changed art history. Then paint could be put into tubes, the then modern oil paint, and this gave rise to things like Impressionism and so on. And then pigments in these tubes became your modern oil paint and eventually acrylic paint. Now, the two main pigments, as I said, I'm going to focus on are lapis lazuli and azurite, both quite different blues with very different properties and also different problems in producing these pigments and painting with them. And I shall be going into detail about how these are actually prepared and how you paint with them. Now, just briefly, I want to just cover some of the pigments. I've got quite a large variety of pigments that you can see here. And in addition to lapis lazuli and azurite, there were, even from ancient Egyptian times, there was a blue glass called Egyptian blue, a pale blue that was used. I have worked with it, but it's rather disappointing when once you've worked with azurite and lapis lazuli. And another glass pigment, smalt, which was often used by Titian in his later paintings, Tintoretto. There were problems with smalt because it cannot be bound in oil. If it's bound in oil, it goes grey to black. It has to be bound in a resin. But those are the only other two blue pigments available to many artists who perhaps didn't have a rich patron behind them to buy the lapis lazuli, which came from Afghanistan and still does. Now, other pigments, we have green pigments, malachite. Here is some malachite in the rock form. We have, if I can find it, yeah. Here we have a Brazilian fuchsite, which of course was not used in Europe, but this is for anyone now thinking of working with mineral pigments. This is really gives you a fantastic sparkly green. You can't get this in acrylic or oil paint. Another green, one of the jaspers, and a red jasper. These are flints. Caveman actually made arrowheads out of these. Gives you beautiful deep green and a very interesting earthy red. So those are the jaspers. Um, Then we have something like this beautiful silver grey, galena. This is incredibly heavy. It's a lead sulfide, so that's why I'm wearing a glove here, just to protect myself. Here, a stibnite. These are beautiful crystals, and actually a little bit of stibnite was once used as a laxative. So if you were suffering from constipation, lick a little bit of this and you'll solve your problem. You don't need a doctor, but you have to be careful with this. Another lovely pigment, vivianite. This will give you dark blue to dark green. It also comes as a clay as well. This is a crystal, a beautiful crystal on a matrix. Then we have the reds. The main red is cinnabar. This is also very heavy. It's a mercuric sulfide, so you really do have to be very, very careful where your mask, a dust mask. And here you can see the flexibility of what you can get. This is a large particle cinnabar, and this is a very fine particle cinnabar, the orange red. And that is just purely from grinding down the pigment. So if you want a deep red, you don't grind too much, and this is then a beautiful orange red. I love that. It's really nice. Now, regular earths, you have yellow ochres, different sorts of yellow ochres you can find everywhere. One I picked up a road outcrop in southern Utah, just lots of it just lying by the roadside. Some beautiful from the south of France. I've even picked some up in New York as well. There's also plenty of ochres. This is also a dark yellow ochre. This is from Maine. So now let me see here. I've got tourmaline, which gives you a really sparkly black. This is also from Maine, and it's quite difficult to crush. It's quite high on the hardness scale, but this gives you an incredible black, and it's very flexible in terms of binding mediums. And then I have a number of whites. I have here, this is a lead white, a flake white. This is what you get when you corrode pieces of lead, and this has to be then processed, cleaned, and washed until you get quite a brilliant white. But again, you have to be very careful what you do with flake white. And some of my latest additions have been cerussite and hydrocerussite. Let me just... here you have a crystal of cerussite, and this will give you the most brilliant white imaginable. This and it's very, very different to modern titanium white. The lead white, this lead white here will be chemically a mixture of cerussite and hydrocerussite. But when you find pure cerussite, then this, of course, is just out of this world. I've been using this now for about the past 2 years. Now, other whites, one is calcite, which is left over from my lapis lazuli production. This is mainly for a water-based binder. And let me see. Oh yeah, I just want to mention too, sometimes I use Gofun, the Japanese Gofun. That's what they use for their white in their hide glue. They mainly paint with a particular hide glue. And but you can't use this with oil. It's too translucent. So, and what have we got here? Oh yes, an antimony. This I've just bought from Kramer Pigments, just for the demonstration. So I think now I've basically covered just an overview of the pigments. And just to finish this section, I just want to show you the difference when cinnabar is mixed with, here, my lead white, mixed with cerussite. It gives you a slightly warmer tint. And this one is what titanium white does. For me, it's dead. And many artists will know, if you mix titanium white with French ultramarine, you get a horrible, not exactly pale blue, but a very dead pale blue. So this is just something to consider. So now then I'll move on to the next part and show you how to prepare azurite. So now the next part of this demonstration is going to be with azurite, which I will crush in my mortar with this heavy-duty pestle. Now I've got different pestles and mortars. I keep this for the general ones. The silvery one, that is just for lead white. Then I have one just for cinnabar, and the small one that is just for realgar and orpiment, the arsenic sulfides. And so I don't have to wash them, and because those pigments, cinnabar, orpiment and realgar, are toxic, and one has to be careful. But on the other hand, there's nothing quite like them. So now what I'm going to do is just show you very, very briefly crushing this and then putting it in the sieve. And then after that, I will show you the levigation process. So I just have to wear a mask for this. I use an old t-shirt that I just put over to keep the dust down. And then, yes, this just to cushion my hand a bit. And then now azurite is not too difficult to crush. You do need to be reasonably fit. So what I'm going to do now is just keep putting it into this bowl and sieving it. Now already there's some beautiful blue coming out, but it's also with a lot of impurity. So here, now I will put this back in and then continue crushing. So now this is just the very first stage. It's also possible to use a laboratory size stone crusher. You can get them between $5,000 and $9,000. One of the main problems is if you crush this pigment too small at the very beginning, then you won't be able to remove the impurities. This is really a very important aspect. This pigment should not be smaller than 50 microns, preferably 50 to 100 microns. 1 micron is 1,000th of a millimeter. Now, this is fairly coarse, which is what you want to begin with. Okay, now let's move to the next part, the actual leviation. Okay, now the next part of this presentation is the leviation of azurite. Now, very often people understand by leviation water leviation. Now, if you want to remove the impurities from azurite, it does not work with just water. Now, I developed a method with casein, and it works remarkably well. I will now show you. I will take some diluted casein. Casein is a very ancient binding medium from the curds of milk, and it was really used very much in Europe. And now I'm going to just add a little bit of casein to the freshly ground azurite, and I'm going to mix this in to produce this paste. And you'll see there's some quite ugly stuff coming out already, and there's a very particular smell as well of wet rock. Now, to this I will start adding water, just carefully at first. You can already see probably things floating up. So again, just mix this thoroughly. Now I'm going to add more water. You can already see there's a deep blue in there. Now I will just really stir this up. Now I will take another bowl and just start pouring this off. Now, with this method, you can use quite poor quality azurite. Now here, this is important because here you see now some of the impurities rising. Now, it will take some time to get this out. Now, I will now add more water. I will leave this bowl standing. I will now take the next bowl and pour this off. Then the next bowl. So these bowls are really useful. They're typically used in Chinese kitchens for making sauces, and they're really excellent for leviation. I got these in Chinatown. I think it was a sale $3 ago. Now, here is where you see this impurity is really coming to the front now. So I take my impurity bowl and I start pouring that off little by little. There will be also impurities settling out in those. Again, you can see. And so little by little, again I add more water, and then you see this coming out. So I always keep an impurity bowl handy. Now, this will take some time. This process will continue. Now, what I will do is, at present, I will dry this out over my double boiler, and this will eventually be reworked on my glass plate. So now I will just put this on the double boiler. The steam will dry it out. Now, if we go back to the first bowl, where we will have a pale blue, but you can see here how much has already come out in this. Okay, so again, and I will again keep adding water. There will come a point when it's become too diluted for it to actually work. So then I have to dry it out, and then eventually I will, let me just now use another bowl. And here you can see. Now, just to summarize this part, what you will see is that I will eventually end up with a whole range of blues. This is the important part of azurite. The large particle azurite is a deep blue, and the smaller particles of azurite give you pale sky blues. And also, just so important to get rid of these impurities because they affect the chroma of your pigment. So I will stop this process now and then move on to the next stage. Right, so now for this part of the presentation, we're going to talk about lapis lazuli. And of course, this is really a famous rock. It makes wonderful jewelry, but the quality that you need for pigment is actually, comes in these sort of pieces of rock. They can't be used for jewelry because they're too brittle. And so I get these from a dealer in Pakistan, and it works very well. Now, with lapis lazuli, there was one main method of producing or extracting the pure lazurite out of the rock. The rock comes with impurities, including calcite, pyrite, which is an iron sulfide, and a number of other less important impurities. But in 1395, Cennino Cennini published his version of extracting the lazurite from the rock, from the crushed rock. And in this method, you made what was basically called a pastille, which is like a dough. Here I've got this sort of leftover dough. It's now quite hard, and it's got all the impurities in this. One of the main problems with this method is it's very wasteful, and you get very small quantities in the beginning of the most purest blue, and then as you knead this dough in a warm lye solution, and the dough is made of resins and wax. In my book, Renaissance Mysteries, I've got various recipes which are available in the literature. some work better than others, and over the years I tried out many different ones. But in the end, I developed my own protocol, which I'm going to show now, in which I remove the iron sulfide with a magnet. Now, normally pyrite is not magnetic, but I found when I put very hot water into this powder, the pyrite in this becomes magnetic. And I have here this very powerful 50-pound magnet, which I place, as you can see, it jumps onto the bowl. And now I'm going to add some hot water and just let this soak in. I'll just use something that's not magnetic just to stir this in. Now, of course, with this hot water you can already see some of the gold sparkle of the pyrites. Now, the important thing here is you'll see, now again another bowl, you'll see as I start washing this out, look at the magnetic effect. And you can see, of course, at this particle size, the pyrite is embedded in these particle sizes. So eventually I will regrind this, dry it, grind it down further. So now I'll just keep adding, again, hot water, because there's still a lot of pyrite. You can't see it. It looks like a pretty pleasant blue. I mean, once it's got water in it, of course, it's a very deep blue. But this, for me, was a revelation. So I'll just tip this out here just to speed things up. So I'll just add, again, a little bit more very hot water. It was one of those moments of desperate inspiration when I just poured some boiling water in and this happened. So now what I will do here is just remove the magnet. It really is powerful. You have to be really careful with this. Don't put it near a cell phone. Okay, now what I'll do is just wash this out. I mean, it looks very blue, but there's a lot of pyrite in that. So I will just keep this in a separate bowl out of the way. Now, so from this point, what I will do is, normally I would wait about 10 minutes for this to settle. But right now I'm just going to pour this off. And then what I will do is now just dry this out over my double boiler, steam dry. And then once that's dry, then I will, let me just put this out of the way. Then I will mull it on this glass plate and grind it down to a finer particle size. This will then release more of the pyrite. So I will do the whole process again, and at each stage I keep removing more and more pyrite. And somewhere along the line, I will end up with my waste bowl full of very grey pigment, which is called ultramarine ash. it's actually then this color. It's not very inspiring. It can be used as paint, preferably mixed with a lead white. So now that is basically this first aspect. The final aspect is then of this preparation is that then I will have the dry pigment and then grind it all again, and then a final leviation with casein, as I showed you with the azurite. And this will then separate the different particle sizes of the lapis. So I will have something that looks paler blue going to, hopefully, and this depends on the quality of the rock that I get, to a very deep blue. So here I've got rather poor quality lapis lazuli, and from the process I ended up with this that's got a lot of calcite, which is very, very difficult to remove because the specific gravity of calcite and lazurite are very, very close. So levigation in casein simply doesn't work. So what I developed was I searched the literature and online, and I found a recipe that used Iraqi soap. So I googled Iraqi soap, and unfortunately it just said soap made by Iraqi refugees, which didn't really help. But anyway, I found a way of, and I realized the important thing was a soap that had olive oil. And so I take little bits of soap, scrape that off, and dissolve it in, again, boiling water. Mix that in, pour the water off while it's very hot, and pour cold water in. Now, all the particles are then coated in a little bit of soap, and lo and behold, then the calcite floats. And it's you can't get everything out, but then when it's ground down, I have quite a nice pale blue quality that is very, very useful if you're going to mix it with lead white to have a pale sky blue. So you don't need to use your best lapis to have a pale sky blue. So I think now here you can see this is drying out, and it's still quite coarse. And so, as I said, this let me put that there. I'll just show you very quickly. I will just then take this, and with my muller, then I will start grinding this down. And with this, for me, it has to be controlled, bringing the particle size down bit by bit. I don't want to go too far, but you can hear, if I go too far, you'll hear the sound just disappear. Now, this is overground. It's too fine to continue removing the impurities. So one just wants to take this down a little bit. Lapis lazuli is quite hard on the Mohs scale, so it does take time, but as you can see, I'm already beginning to get an incredible blue, and in the next section you'll see what this looks like as a paint. So right now I will finish this part of the presentation and move to a painting. So for the final part of this demonstration, I'm going to be talking about binding mediums and the problems also that arise with pigments of low refractive index, namely azurite and lapis lazuli. Now, the conservation literature often tells you that it's bound in linseed oil or walnut oil. Well, from 30 years of experience, it does not work. What you need are the fir balsam resins. Now here I've got one of the best, which is the Austrian white fir. And from this, the fir balsam resin is one of the main components of the binding medium for lapis lazuli or azurite if you want to work with azurite in an oil and resin. Now, the oil that you require is just a little amount so that it becomes a workable paint. Now, the fir balsam resins they're very thick and you can't paint with them. So they have to be fused 50-50 with pure spirits of turpentine. And that I do again in my water bath. I make little jars, put them in the water bath, and at 165 degrees Fahrenheit, you can fuse the two and they'll never separate again. Now, just briefly, to show you, this was azurite, and you can see I tested many different oils. The result was mainly most of them discolored very badly. And these tests I carried out over many years. Also, the Vienna University of Technology in Austria did some 7-year aging tests for me, and we had remarkable results. So it took me a number of years to solve the problems with lapis and azurite, and also to some degree cerussite. So now I'm going to just show you mixing then. I have some very nice lapis lazuli there, my now pure natural ultramarine. I'm going to take my fir balsam resin, enough to mix this. Now you'll see, because it's a pigment of low refractive index, you will see that it now suddenly becomes an incredibly deep blue. I just have to add a little bit more. Now, one of the also misleading aspects of sometimes the conservation literature is that it says lapis lazuli requires a large amount of oil so that you can paint with it. Well, this will result in the most horrendous discoloration within about 5 years. It takes about that amount of time. Now, here I've got a fairly stiff paste. Okay, this is too stiff to paint with. Now, I add a little bit of walnut oil. It's a very pale walnut oil. I only need a little bit. And this will change the nature of this paint. Now, I'll take this molar, and now I will make sure that that is fully dispersed. You see, I don't need huge quantities. Now, unscrape this off here. Now, of course, your Renaissance artist had his slaves or apprentices, however you want to look at it, and they did this for you. Now, in order to paint, I will also use a diluent of the fir balsam resin, but about 20% resin to 80% spirits of turpentine. So I will dip my brush, and the best brush is actually sable hair, the finest sable hair. So unfortunately, sable hair brushes are expensive. Now, I can now dilute this a little bit so it becomes very easy to apply. Now, this is a very, very different method of painting compared to what you may be used to with tube oil paint. This painting is my Pandora's Plight, which I felt was... Now you can see here, I can make it very deep blue, or I can spread it out a little bit more. And you can see how translucent this is. And of course, this is quite a large area to cover. Sometimes I think to myself, did I make the right decision to have such a large area? So you can see that now this blue is starting to really show itself as an incredible deep blue. And here I will then blend this into the lead white and cerussite to produce a pale blue. So one needs patience with this pigment. Some pigments, like the earth pigments, are much easier to work with. So there you can see now this is how this is developing. I will just finish off with this little bit of paint that I have here. And when I was doing my research into the binding mediums, of course, one of the most famous quotes of art history was by Rubens. And he said, "I paint with turpentine." Now, of course, this was badly translated. And he said, because oil spoils the colors. And he was absolutely right. But, of course, turpentine, the pure spirits of turpentine, is distilled from the pine resins. So when you put two and two together, then you begin to realize, yeah, Rubens knew, and so did many of the Flemish painters. The Italians, of course, had more of a problem. Some of their blues really lost their color because they used oil. So that is then this aspect of painting with lapis lazuli. Just as a final touch now, I wanted to also just mention the root madder and cochineal. And this dress here that I'm working on has an underlayer of azurite with cochineal, and then onto that I put the gold leaf and then drew into that to start making a pattern. This will eventually become white, but following the layering, the pigment layering of Titian, he often starts even with lapis lazuli in the underlayer, which is really just mind-blowing, and then he will build up. There's one painting in which a yellow dress, he starts with lapis lazuli, then root madders, and eventually yellow. But here, this one will be white. So this gives you a quick overview of some of the possibilities with the natural pigments. There's a lot more work involved if you are going to do it all yourself, but of course you can buy most of these pigments from Kramer Pigments. I've collaborated with them over many years now, and Georg Kramer's repertoire of colour has increased tremendously over the past 30 years. So there is actually no colour that you cannot have, and in that sense, I'm always very excited to come here to the studio every day, and we can perhaps just quickly look at a few of the different paintings to finish up. So, just to show you a few paintings and what you can do with natural pigments, all natural pigments. There's no synthetic pigments at all. And this painting, Sarcophagus for Srebrenica, which is based upon a genocide in 1996 in former Yugoslavia. I started the painting at that time, but I never was able to resolve it. And a couple of years ago, when I introduced cerussite into my palette, then I found a solution, because I could make a very beautiful pale blue with azurite and cerussite and lead white, and also a little bit of mountain crystal mold into the pigment, and then with patches of gold leaf, where I could then paint over the gold leaf, and then I found a solution to this painting. So then this painting, as you can see, it's quite a large work, again with a full-size cast of a model I worked with in Munich. And here, the painting's called The Lapis and the Opus. The idea is from an alchemical term, and it's the idea of transformation. And here it's a form of an annunciation. And for me, the main aspect of this painting was the wings, and in which I just did strokes of colour and built them up. So mixtures of malachite, lead white and cerussite, cochineal deep red glazes, and here azurite, large particle azurite, and fuchsite, the Brazilian fuchsite that I showed at the beginning. And then this, again, a dress in gold leaf to really bring out this figure. So I don't know what I'll do with this painting. It weighs about 50 pounds. It's on a panel with linen stretched on the panel, and but in a way I can't really think of selling it. It just accompanies me through the day. So this very recent painting, a bit of light relief from my heavy-duty Pandora, and this one is, of course, the cherry blossom that we've suddenly had, and so here I created a smaller painting. I've called it Persephone returns each spring. And so here I have a tree in full blossom, and here some petals, and again I've done some sort of cherry blossom pattern on her gold leaf dress. The gold leaf was applied onto the lapis lazuli while it was still sticky, and then I, with a bamboo pen, I just freely drew into the dress. So here she's greeting the spring. So that's been almost a bit of light relief, and here I have again the azurite mixed with cerussite to give this beautiful pale blue to contrast with the lapis lazuli.